Thanks everybody for a very dynamic and energetic poster session. And that hour plus went by like in the blink of an eye. So I'm sure we could have gone on for much, much longer. Apologize if you would like to spend more time, but there's only so much we can do in the limited time we have. So, but we do want to take this opportunity to kind of get some initial reactions from our external guests. Many of them are investors or involved in technology development in the industry, both emerging and established. So the purpose of this session is to get initial feedback and then maybe even some specific feedback based on the sessions, the posters that different folks got to see. Reactions and comments, critiques, and so forth. And we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A as well. So please, if you use this conference IO to post your questions in, we'll also have a mic. We got a fixed mic here, and we got a roving mic. So the way we're going to use the time, we've got about between 45 minutes. We might be able to push a little bit more than that for everything I just described. So there's no way we're going to get it all in. And be super smooth. So what I'd like to do, though, is give, first of all, an opportunity. We'll use the roving mic for our guests who participated in the Q&A with the PIs and saw the posters to give us their kind of first initial impression. What was your takeaways, any advice or recommendations for us as we go forward? It could be specific on the technical aspects of things, but it could also be about the way we're doing things and general, just general observations. So I know Peter has been involved all along from the very beginning helping us plan this. So let's start off with Peter, and then he can then hand it off to another person, and we'll kind of just go around until we've exhausted all of our visitors, and then we'll go into the Q&A part after that. How's that sound, Peter? Okay. So, and I will try to manage time. So if you guys go on too long, I'll say, can you wrap it up and pass it off to the next person? Sound good? Okay. Oh, I also had to make a comment. If I forget, let me. Is that when you're going on the tours this afternoon, those who are taking the tours, you need to take your personal items with you when you go. So and I'll remind again at the end, hopefully I won't forget, Shannon won't let me forget. And then, but just to keep that in mind, you don't want to be leaving anything behind because we're going to wrap up at the end of this session. Thanks. So Peter, it's all yours.
Okay, so can you hear me? Okay,
Well, we got to get somebody to turn the mic up. No, it's supposed to be foolproof. Oh my gosh, it's too high tech for us. All right, I hear it. We're good to go now. Okay.
All right, so the mystery of this mic is revealed. What's
and
inside this thing.
let me ask each of you to stand up so that everybody can see and face the audience and the camera, because I'm sure we're streaming. So.
Okay, great. I don't want to be too repetitive from the material that we covered yesterday, but I would say that from the poster session, I tried to make a point of spending time with a few of the posters that I hadn't seen already that either we weren't doing the presentation work for yesterday, or et cetera, and it just is a reiteration of that session is fantastic. You always want more time when you have time with the posters and with the PIs, and that the CAS showcase in my mind is. It's so multi-purpose. It really is best served as a general way to communicate the type of work that's going on inside NASA, and to connect with the experts in the space for follow-on conversations. So going around this afternoon, a couple of things occurred to me. One is I want to have follow-up conversations with everyone with whom I spoke, and the other is that a big part of what comes out of this are the follow-on conversations and the potential for connecting the research and the PIs that are doing that work here with what we see out in the startup world or out in other parts of the commercial area. And it does tie into this question of where do we take this research from here, either within NASA or on the outside? And a part of solving for that is having really good radar and feelers out into what's going on in the startup community, what's going on in academia, and other areas of innovation, so that we can make those connections as easily and fluidly as possible, without a lot of overhead, without a lot of formality even, but just that idea sparking from a conversation, and the fact that maybe a few months ago I met someone else who was approaching a similar problem from a different direction, and shouldn't these people get together and speak with each other? And so that, the last 2 days, that has just been such a reiterating theme, a repeating theme in what I've seen, and helps us figure out the path forward for this, and helps us figure out within NASA, how do we prioritize and how do we think about the things that we carry forward and the different ways that we can do that. So I'll leave it there.
And if you just pick somebody and pass it on.
Okay. Anybody want to speak next? Don't be shy. Okay, here we go. Srini.
Yeah. Hi, Srini Anand at Intel Capital. I didn't have as much time as Peter. I'm sorry. I just came in maybe 20, 25 minutes back. But I was here last year, and I saw the poster sessions. I think maybe one of them is here again. But what I do like is sharing the progress that you've made, sharing some of the partnerships that you've done. I think it's very important what Peter said is, how do you make the leap to commercial? And if you are interested in commercial, how do you make the leap? And what sort of mid and near and midterm problems that you can solve with this technology? And maybe you find some existing verticals that can use this in terms of licensing. Now, I know all that, it doesn't apply to a lot of the hardware-based, whether it's batteries or motors. These things are hard problems. They take a lot of capital. They probably need some non-dilutive capital. But I like that you're actually showing the partnership where you're actually going out and working with commercial partners, whether it's quantum or whether it's aviation. What I do want to add is, when you share the technology, maybe I'm not as well versed with aviation as a lot of others here are, or whether it's space or quantum, is to maybe up-level it a little higher. I think when I see the 3 or 4 different things, the takeaways from this, it always seems very in-depth technical, but maybe there's a translation layer that you apply and share so what if it works, right? It could be the best new encryption scheme, but why does it matter? And the reason I'm saying is, on the way over here, I talked to someone who was doing post-quantum crypto, and the question is, if everyone believes it's going to take 5 to 10 years, then why do we care now? And then there are answers to it that I would wish to see that. That would be my only thing. And then the third thing is, I know there's no element of capital here shared, but what does it take for you? If you say, I need another year or 6 months worth of work and I need 3 people, maybe you can share some of that capital constraints that could take you to the next step. It could be just man hours, but whatever it is, it would help to see what does it take to take this out of NASA and apply it to the commercial industry. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Luka Tomjanovic. Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me. I have been in aerospace pretty much my entire life. Most recently, I was a partner at Airbus Ventures, investing in early stage companies around aerospace and other tangential markets and industries. So feel very strongly and passionately about the technologies that we have seen in the projects here, which I believe are all very important and tackling some of the biggest barriers that aviation is facing, especially as we think about the advanced air mobility, to quote Peter at Radius. And those are around safety, certification, manufacturing rates, and I think all of those are it was an excellent subset of projects that I had the chance to briefly see, even without the benefit of yesterday's sessions. I would maybe offer just a few high-level comments. One, I think, is that it is very important to always keep in mind what the end product or service will look like. It's very easy to get lost in R&D and sort of lose line of sight to what the end user is and how they will be utilizing the product or benefiting from the technology. We talked about, or we've heard from the panel earlier today, that there's one of the enablers of innovation, certainly at NASA, but broadly, is breaking down these silos and barriers. And I think in addition to just doing cross centers and cross projects, there's a need to go cross boundaries and into the private sector. So I'm really encouraged that a lot of the projects are already forming partnerships with industry players, and I think this is a great way to actually collect feedback and not lose sight of the ultimate goal. I think aviation is not really known as a fast to iterate and quick to adopt kind of industry. So I think it's really critically important to keep in mind what the practical implementation of those technologies will look like. And for that, again, the best thing is to just keep talking to the customer or identify customers early on and make sure that you're working towards something that they care about. From an investor perspective, what really matters as well is to be able to communicate maybe a bit more clearly what the ROI is and what the value proposition is in a way that really resonates with people who are not necessarily the experts. So when you do come up with these ROIs, I would encourage drawing the system box wide enough so that you can encapsulate any upstream and downstream consequences, maybe some unintended consequences, and you might have great value proposition in a fairly narrow field that you are evaluating, but there might be, pretty serious side effects, either upstream or downstream. So how you manage those and what the complete total value proposition to the customer is, that's very important. And one last point, once you advance on the TRLs and think about commercializing this, a VC will, there will come a time when you will be asked the question of how much time or how much capital do we need to wait until the business starts producing some revenue back. So I think I know this is very much focused on technology, but I think it's important to keep that in mind as early as possible because it might inform some of the decisions that you're making in your projects. Maybe I'll stop here, okay. And happy to talk offline or individually with any other PIs.
Alex, you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Alex with Creative Ventures. We're a financial investor, so we're not specifically focused on the aerospace industry. I do agree with actually everything that has been said so far. So at the behest of sounding like a broken record, I'll be succinct. I feel like there were 3 points I walked away with, and I certainly would have liked more time with the posters. Would have been great to have more conversations. But maybe just in terms of thoughts or further questions that I would ask or want to see answered from the poster session. The first is from a very high level perspective, what's the impact? So one of the questions we always ask is, if it works, will it matter? So when the technology actually gets to scale and maturity, what does it actually enable, or what is the actual impact? The second would be some notional understanding of the timeline or pathway, either in terms of further research and development needs or commercial progress, or just sort of a sense of what a timeline might look like. And I definitely agree that aerospace is an industry that tends to be fairly slow moving compared to other industries. And that brings me to my third question, which would be, are there other applications outside aerospace that the technology might have value in or be useful in? Oftentimes we'll work with companies that might be focused on a certain industry, whether it's aerospace or automotive, but because of the timeline to bring products to market in those industries, they will typically focus on an application in another industry, which might be faster to move and have sort of easier requirements in terms of bringing a product to market. And that allows the company to prove what they're doing works, has value, people will buy it, and also scale up typically a manufacturing process or something like that. So some sense of alternative pathways, and realize I'm talking to an aerospace crowd, but I think much of the technology, certainly that I saw, has applications across a tremendous number of other industries as well.
Thanks very much. And so I know we have a number of other guests who are from outside of NASA, and so we don't want to just limit it to the, the four who've just spoken so far. So if you can raise your hand, if you would like to offer some feedback or comments, and then if not that, if they've said everything we need to hear, then we can go on to some Q&A and further discussion. So. If you could stand up and also tell us where you're from, so we kind of we have the background perspective.
I'll talk a little bit. I'm from General Atomics, I'm from General Atomics, and we build the Predator airplanes, and so a lot of the technologies that CAS has shown is very intriguing. We all know that, but there's no path forward. And you need to show us what that path forward is. I mean, I can go and have a path forward for your technology, but I'm not going to go invest in it. I'm just not, because I already have a product that flies. I already have a product that works. You have to show me why your product or each one of your programs shows me that the product that they're pushing is better than what I can do. Okay, I don't necessarily have the best product, but it works for me. It makes money for my company, and General Atomics is privately owned, so there's no we're not traded, publicly traded, so my boss decides what he wants to do. He tells me. But he tells me that, hey, if you can find a technology that can go onto my airplane and make it better and cost me less to put out, I'm all for it. So within NASA, there's a lot of venues that you guys can utilize to help improve the TRL levels. And if you show me or show the OEMs what that path forward is, we would be interested in jumping on board to help you with that, right? So as an example, you guys have Icona. We're interested in working with Icona. I guess now you guys don't have Icona anymore. I think you guys gave it away or something like that. But if you use Icona to show some of this technology, we're more than happy to help you with it, because we have expertise on Icona, and we could help you with that. And so one of the things that I see here in this, and I've been involved in a couple of case reviews, is that I don't know how to move things forward for you. If you tell me how to move things forward for you, and I think it is relevant to my product line, I'd be more than happy to think about helping you out. So, with that.
Anyone else? Oh, I know there's some other thoughts out there. Come Okay. How about questions then? Let's offer some questions. Or the other option is to also maybe some specific feedback on the individual projects. So if either one, I mean, I think we can go for, but I think questions first might be better, and then if we exhaust all of those, we can go back into a little more detail. So I don't know if you can put up if there's any questions that have come through the IO. No, nobody's got any questions. You're making it hard for me up here, I'll tell you.
There's no cookies in this box, is it? So I'm John Cannell from NASA Langley, and just have a comment based upon my personal experience working at NASA for quite a few decades that I won't say, but I think, to the comments that were made, it just speaks to the importance to me of teaming with the OEMs and other external collaborators early on in a technology development so they have buy-in into whatever it is. That makes the transition so much more easier than us going off and developing something on our own and presenting it to industry and say, look at what we have, isn't this great? And it's, as the last gentleman just mentioned, you then have to prove to them it's gonna work for them and help them both from a technical and a financial standpoint. Whereas if you have the partners involved early on, that transition is just much easier.
So to follow up, please pass that around, and if anybody else has a question, go for it. But I have a follow-up question to that, and it kind of ties back into some of the discussions we had earlier, is that, so when we're presenting information about the projects and activities that we're doing, we tend to be technical, right? Because that's kind of our domain, in the technology development. But it sounds to me like there's opportunities if we could communicate in, say, a poster or in a pitch as to the partnership we have and the value that the partner sees in participating with us, or maybe even the level of investment that they have. Does that mean anything to you guys when you're looking at the potential opportunities around an activity or concept that we're pursuing? If there's a skin in the game, for example, from an external partner, that might indicate that there's traction around the ideas. Go ahead, Jessica.
So with respect to needing to communicate the potential use, our initial thought with a forum like this was to start that process. I'd like to open up the field to get more specific feedback, in addition to changing the words that are being shared to be more targeted to particular applications, to potentially show more of a qualitative ROI that could be used. But if there are key features that would make experiences like this more value added to communicate those future uses of the technology that's being developed, on behalf of the CAS project team, either now or later, if you wish to do it in writing, we definitely want to hear that feedback.
So in response to your question and to the second question there, is that, I'm more likely to, if I'm interested in a project, I'm more likely to go convince my president and my VP that, hey, it behooves us to go and work with you closely. But I have to have a path, right? I mean, I really have to understand what you're doing and how that ties into what my product line is. Whether I work for General Atomics or Lockheed Martin or Boeing, right? I have to have a path to say this product or your technical ideas is going to help my product line improve its capability. So if I am going to infuse somebody to work with you on that, I need to have a return. an ROI that I can track, that I can go back to my boss and say, yeah, I can track that. And there's an end product to it. The bottom of the bucket is usually around 3 to 4 years, right? So if you can come up with something like that for the CAS, I mean, there are several projects here that I looked at, and that's very interesting to us. But it's so low in TRL level, it's great, but how do I take it to the next level? How do I do that? What's the path forward?
So to follow up then is, so if one of the PIs had a conversation with you and said, hey, you expressed interest, and they call you up, is there a dialogue that
Oh, yeah.
goes
Yes.
on to help
Yes.
focus in on what that opportunity is, right?
Yes,
Because
yes. We'd be
you
planning
know,
that.
or would you expect them to do all that research kind of about specifically what you guys are doing, what your product line features are, and all that kind of stuff before they even come to you?
Well, they should research what we do, right? It would be, I mean, I don't know enough of their research. I don't know enough of within the 15 minutes, I don't know everything about it, right? So they need to do enough research to say, hey, here's this product. I think this product can help you communicate more or have a longer endurance or have higher capability in terms of maneuverability, takeoff, and all that sort of thing. That's something that we would be very interested in. So,
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I'm going to throw it.
Follow up on what the gentleman was saying, and kind of what I'm seeing right now is we're bringing a bunch of ideas, and in some cases, we're taking shots in the dark at what an airplane needs or doesn't need, or what an assembly line for an airplane may need or won't need. So maybe there should be a two-way street forum where VCs or industry partners that are traditional can say, hey, we're building this thing. Man, we'd love to access these greater power regimes to enable something. I don't have to tell us what we're enabling, but give us targets to shoot at, so that way when we're developing ideas, we're not developing ideas like frogs in a well.
I think that's a good opportunity to talk about what we've been trying to do within Showcase, and it's an experiment, right? We're trying to develop this further, and so having those kinds of conversations, 15 minutes is obviously not enough to get deep knowledge of really what's going on. But it is enough to say, that interests me, right? And then I should have a conversation or maybe have questions to ask along the lines of what Samuel just said, or what was brought up earlier is what's the value? We think you're the value I have for you is this, and then that's where it starts off the conversation. So that's the purpose, the intention here is that we're not going to get closed deals at the end of a day and a half, right? I mean, what we're going to do is we're going to spark some opportunities of connections, and hopefully those will then develop. So, part of that though is following up and establishing those connections, and then I think getting back to what Jessica's point is how do we know that those are happening, and so we can do what we can to facilitate and strengthen those, as well as identify where they're not happening and maybe force them to happen. So that's just a comment from the project kind of perspective. So Gary, go ahead.
Thanks. I just want to say my frogs in a well idea will come back. I don't know. I'm sorry. Obviously not picked by CAS. So my question to the VCs is, how can we get better in touch with the ecosystem you guys live in day to day, where you're getting exposed to needs that we could target, right? Do we just read TechCrunch every day or sign on to a newsletter? Or, there's a community you guys live in. A lot of that community is exposed online or in groups, I don't know, at events. How can we, from the government, start navigating near the edges of those ponds so we see what's going on, so we can be better informed about the kind of topics we pick up and how we shape the things we're developing?
I think that's an excellent point. Do you guys want to comment on Gary's question? Alex or Peter or Luca?
I'd probably say, I mean, you said how VCs are exposed to it. In fact, we are exposed to it, at least from my own perspective. We are exposed to it from talking to entrepreneurs. I don't pretend to understand that there are gaps in all the industries that I look at. If I talk to 3 or 4 companies, I realize it's an impending problem. You can keep track of some trends, but you don't pretend to be seeing the future. But to your second point, how do you get plugged in? So I was just checking, I think I see the second question there, private tech incubators, and there is this thing called Starburst out in LA. They're doing this for aerospace. I mean, they're doing this for space tech. And Techstars, which is a very well-known incubator more in the broad software and other areas, have joined up with Starburst. So there is some interest because space tech has become an area. So where is that aviation tech? I think eVTOL has taken a lot of the publicity and a lot of the attention, and drones have taken that. But there are other things around that. Maybe that's the kind of partnership that you want. I don't know what the monetary exchange there is, but they can bring all of those elements. They can bring the coaching. What they do well is all of that. Right? But what they don't do well is also sensing and telling you that these are the gaps. It's kind of, that comes pretty much from the industry. And usually VCs have these CIO councils or CTO councils where you go once in a while, once in 6 months, and you talk to them and they tell us like what is working and what's not working. What is your advisory council? Is there an advisory council that includes Boeing, Airbus, General Dynamics, and a bunch of others, telling them that this is the problem? We are doing certification and we don't have a software that does it well. So you get to that. But most of the time, entrepreneurs tell us that.
Thanks. So, Peter, go ahead.
So I would reiterate, that. It's at the bottom line, it's about, just having conversations with us every few months, stay in touch. Internally at Radius, we keep a database of everything we see going on in the space, and try to track and capture all of that startup activity, all of that partnership activity, predicted timelines on major milestones for the different companies. Because one piece of our job is to try to synthesize a picture of the state of this whole movement in technology's impact on flight, and try to develop a viewpoint that sums up from all of that insight, all of that activity in different startups or different parts of the rest of the community, to have a feel for that. So, that comes from conversations with entrepreneurs. It comes from coming to events like this one, and then also things that others in the community, like the Vertical Flight Society, pull together. There are just a lot of opportunities to get at least cursory level exposure to who's doing what and what's going on and where the problems are occurring. I would say we also spend a fair amount of time close with the standards bodies who are trying to sort out the systems level engineering of how this future system is going to fit together. And from that, you can also start to see where the gaps and the needs are. But it is the sum total of those conversations that sort of gives you the picture and helps develop that profile.
And just to add to this, if you really want to seek out what the problems are, you should be talking to the customers. And yes, the VCs are there to help and guide you and support you and do whatever is possible to get you there, ultimately to your goal. But you should be getting inspiration from the market and from the customers. And coming up with an idea for a project for the sake of being busy or doing something maybe slightly better is not really going to get you anywhere. It has to be driven by a critical need in the market. And the best place to start is the customer.
Great. Any other questions? Oh, so here's going.
All right, so as a technical person, I'm getting a little bit of mixed messages. So we're told 30% we should be failing 7 out of 10 times. And that's how we're going to innovate, right? So for you guys in the real world, government worker, right? If I go to an industry partner, you don't want to hear I'm going to fail 7 out of 10 times. You got to make money. You need me to succeed. So we get a little bit of a mixed message. We want to do cutting edge research, and we want to take risks, but at the same time, we have to be successful to get into industry. So we're dancing a line here. And I think that's why everybody in this, everybody complains about transition, and it's because that. Researchers like me, I don't want to do engineering tasks. If the problem is simple, industry has engineers, they should do it. As the government, I feel like we should be taking the risk. I agree, we should be failing 7 out of 10 times. But our industry partners need to realize that we're going to take high risk for high reward. So we're going to need you guys to say, all right, well, we dumped a little bit of money, you failed 7 out of 10 times, but we got 3 really good things in those 7 in that last round of 10 projects. I will ask you guys, are you okay with a percentage like that, or is that too risky for industry, for the VC world? Does CAS need to change their expectations on risk? How does that translate between what we do from the government into industry?
That's a big question.
I'll jump in, and I think that's an important point. So folks have different risk tolerance, right? And we're an early stage venture investor. We take a lot of risk. The venture capital is called risk capital for a reason. And the 70% probability of failure, I think for us that's perfectly nominal and built into our model of how we invest, provided that the consequence of success is actually meaningful or impactful. So it's sort of a question of risk reward. Now I think we probably have a very different risk tolerance than industry, for example, but companies we tend to work with, maybe we invest in pretty early on, help the company de-risk both along technical and business metrics and get to the point where it might be more palatable to industry or maybe to other types of investors. There's sort of a whole landscape of risk tolerance that people might have and take, and I think part of the question really is identifying folks to work with who have the appropriate risk tolerance for the stage of the project or the company, if it's even a company at that point.
So to follow up on the notion of the failure, so there's different types of risk at different parts of the process, as well as different risk takers, right? So I mean, your risk, each researcher is taking a risk, and the likelihood that they're going to compete for, in the past, the way CAS has worked is we've competed, right? You come to a pitch day and you're maybe 1 out of 7 or something that they may be selected, and you would be, to get there you were 1 out of something, right? And so there's risk, there's failure all along that path, and it's kind of we're fooling ourselves if we aren't recognizing that there's risk. We're navigating a series of risks, right, as we move along. And so what the risk at the transition level of coming out of CAS is stuff that's already made it through a number of assessments, right? And at the risk that some of it's technical risk, some of it's programmatic risk, some of it's business risk, there's a whole variety of them. So it's not like there's one risk we're all taking. I think it's important to recognize it's a sequence and process of risk management. And so when we are looking at CAS as a portfolio of projects, there is a balance in the portfolio similar to investment portfolios. You don't want, you want to take sufficient technical risk that you're going to have some percentage of success of the really big wins, which is what we're trying to drive towards when we say high transformational potential. We're going to take high risk for high potential impact. That's what we're talking about. So that's similar to, I think, what we've heard from the VCs. So all along there's a different way to think about risk anyway. And I'm not to pretend that we understand it all or that we have a whole theory of how this works. But we definitely don't have so going back to the second question here is about this notion of, well, where do we get these tech incubators? Like I think Starburst is a broker kind of organization. They provide some kind of services. Techstars is an incubator kind of facilitates a number of innovation. Angel networks also provide support for more of the stuff that's already ready to go into commercialization. So I would just wanted to comment that NASA has some of these. It doesn't have all of these. And as some of them work well for doing the types of things we've done in the past, and some of them don't work so well for doing the things we're trying to do here. And so part of that is understanding where we need to make improvements, make changes, and recognize how to utilize the services and skills and capabilities we have within the agency already. So when we have licensing, we have commercialization, we have public affairs, we have financial management, we have all those, but they're not necessarily set up to be an incubator, right? And so, so figuring that out, getting feedback from you guys as to what we need, and also suggestions of how it's done elsewhere, and we can take as a model and examples of things to try and experiment with within our own environment is really helpful, and that's another part of this conversation we're having today. So, you got a question back
Yeah,
there?
this is a question generally for maybe CAS management and even the VCs as well. Assuming sort of an optimistic view, let's say we do produce something that transitions or is potential transition or companies interested in, how do you see sort of the future after, let's say you are transitioning? Does NASA play sort of a consultant role? Like, do the researchers that developed it work with the company closely? Like, I guess I'm just sort of new into this, so I'm trying to understand in the future, are we going to work with the company, go to the company and work with them, work within NASA? How does the relationship unfold after you, find something that you want to transition?
There are examples of that historically that we have been able to
Wait,
build
John, can you wait for the microphone? Yeah.
agreements and relationships around that sort of additional support. Now, we obviously need to be careful with that as you're applying civil service resources to support what could be viewed as a single company objective. But with the right agreements, we've been able to do that at times. So it's not necessarily a, throw it over the fence, hands off, and they run with it. So again, there are opportunities to be creative with that, but it'll be a one-off condition. Yeah, and we'll figure that out. So Marty, I'm looking at the time here.
Yeah, we
We're
have
just
about 5
a
more
little bit
minutes.
left. I just want to make a comment, reflect a little bit on what I think I've heard over the last 45, 50 minutes we've been talking here. Making sure that we've got relevance around the activities that we choose to invest in, such that answering the question, if it works, will it matter, is a critical thing that we need to be doing at our upfront stages. But our ability to be smart in terms of identifying those and investing in those comes from a much more regular engagement with this community and additional members of this community, whether it be the emerging market, the traditional market, or convergent markets and the venture side. As Marty had indicated, we've talked earlier over the last day and a half, this event is an effort, has expanded to be an effort to try to do that. What I'm also hearing is that, and this is kind of an obvious statement, doing this once a year is not enough. So I think one of the things that we need to think about as we are evolving CAS is what are those additional venues and mechanisms to continue to get your eyes and ears on what we're doing, to be able to influence what we are investing in, and to be able to enable those transition paths by means of a much more consistent communication with you. The thought of having once a quarter a CAS showcase or a showcase isn't going to happen. Maybe we do it at a large scale like this, remaining once a year. But I think we have reason to think about other methods and mechanisms to bring you folks in, whether it be virtually or otherwise on a smaller basis, so that we're smarter and that you're smarter as well on where we are with our developments and activities, such the opportunity to transition that and impact the community are there. So I mean, just a couple comments from my side. Richard, Isaac, do you have any thoughts or reflections? Marty, I mean, you've got the mic, so I'm not.
No.
I don't need to.
I've said what I was
Set you
gonna
up.
say.
Okay.
So we also have, Jay or Jimmy?
No,
if there's
I'll pass
anything
it on.
you
I don't
wanna
really-
offer, that would be helpful too.
My only comment was going to be about John. There might be avenues that are already set that we can be there and don't have a full showcase, but being able to maybe a conference or other type of event in which we can participate to communicate the things that we're doing in a more regular basis, no more than 6 months apart or so. But there are avenues that we can explore. That was my only comment. You have any?
Okay. Well, we're at the end of the time for this session, so thanks very much for excellent interchange with questions, answers, feedback, and suggestions. This is really helpful for us as we go forward. So I just want to make a comment again. Is that we've been doing these I/O conference I/O questions. These are all being archived and recorded. So we're going to follow up with many of these, and we've got folks that are going to try to. We'll look at them and seeing if we can provide answers to some of these questions that didn't get answered, get asked during the conference. So just we'll let you know that it's not all going into a black hole and never be seen again. So with that, I'd like to introduce Isaac again, who's going to introduce our next keynote speaker, or our guest speaker.
Yes, and before I do that, I'd like to mention to everyone that all the presentations that we saw yesterday, they will be in the NARI website at the end of today. So either tomorrow morning you can go and you will see each one of the presentations there. You can download them and see them there. Okay, so we have our keynote guest speaker from Informatica, Sumeet Kumar Agrawal. He's a senior director of Big Data Product Management at Informatica, a world leader in enterprise cloud data management and data integration. With over 12 years of experience working on different Informatica technologies, he manages and leads data engineering products and is responsible for evaluating big data partners technologies for Informatica. And with that, Kumar, and I'm sorry if I butcher your name. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much. It's always hard to talk just before the lunch, but hopefully you find this interesting. All right, so my name is Sumeet, as my name and my accent can tell. I'm from India. I grew up in a small town in India, and when I was growing up, there was one dream in me that I should come to NASA and actually see NASA. Never got an opportunity. Tried in NASA, but I was not as smart as some of you guys sitting here. So I ended up taking technology, and now I'm in Informatica. It's our data management company, and I manage our big data product portfolio, mostly our data engineering, AI, ML, IoT, and all these technologies. So I manage the roadmap, the product directions, and all of these things. And I like to put a disclaimer that since I'm standing in front of you guys, I'm not an expert in aeronautics. I don't know not much about NASA. But what I've done in this talk is that I wanted to give you guys a perspective about data and about data management, how data and data management can be useful in every space, especially in NASA and also in the aeronautics industry. So this is what I've tried to do in this talk. All right, so I think you guys all know that there are a lot of data, right? And I say that the sky is not the limit for the data. And there are multiple examples of this, right? Gone are the days when the missiles and the spacecrafts were very much related only to NASA and a bigger organization, right? Now we have seen smaller companies are coming up with small nanosatellites like CubeSats and all, which they are launching in the space. And I've done some research and I found out that there are a couple of companies in Australia called Fleet, and who is actually sending a lot of CubeSats in the space to gather data. And not just that, right? There are some Indian companies too who is actually sending satellites in the space to get information. And we believe that that with this space, there will be around 800 or 900 nanosatellites by 2024. So you can imagine the kind of data these satellites will generate. And also there was another initiative which actually went in with this square kilometer array. So this is one initiative which is actually taken by Australian and South African government to actually create the world's largest radio telescope. So their idea is that they want to have millions of antenna, and that antenna will actually give help to astronauts. So the main point is that there is a lot of data which is actually being collected. And if I talk especially about NASA, I mean, how many of you know this picture? Any raise of hand? Many of you, okay. So this was pretty unique to me that Curiosity rover, which was launched by NASA in 2011, I think it got landed in 2012, it has around 17 cameras, which is where it is collecting the images. And you guys are not just collecting the data, you are also doing some sophisticated data engineering, which means you are trying to take the data which is coming from this, and you are figuring out whether the life is possible in Mars, how much water it is, and you are trying to do all these kind of advanced analytics once you are getting this humongous amount of data. And not just NASA, right? I have also seen that this data which is coming out from satellites and also from the space is being used for many humanitarian reasons. So there is a company called Climate, which is taking this data and they are predicting what is the right time to do agriculture, how can they increase the crops, and also the world population. They can predict the world population, whether what is the rate at which the world population is increasing. And there is a study with this data that the world population will increase 50% by 2100. And I was really fascinated by this company called Planet. And maybe some of you may know about this company. And what the main goal of this company is to actually send satellites to space. And then what it does is it actually collects, in a very microscopic level, it collects the images of Earth. And actually it can do up to 10 meters of precision, and with that kind of data you can actually figure out a lot of things. So one of the use cases which they have given was in Bangladesh. They were able to figure out how the refugees are being habilitated when you have actually put the bridges and when the roads were being done, and if there is a way to figure out that the climate has changed. So there is a lot of things people are doing with this data. So which means that the data is humongous, then there is a lot of opportunity in front of us to collect this data and do some meaningful action with it. So now, if I take an example of aviation, right, or aeronautic industry, so what I did was I actually read a paper which is published in IEEE. It was all about aviation safety. And the main idea of this paper was, actually this was influenced when the Malaysian Airlines 370, when that got disappeared in 2014, that actually opened the eye for everybody in the space to figure out what exactly is happening in the aeronautic safety. So traditionally, if you guys know that we generally collect all this data which is coming from airlines, and we collect all this data and we put it into a black box, which gets streamlined in the real time in a ground where they do analytics of that data, and they figure out if there is any issues with the data and can they send alerts. So the problem in this whole thing was when the big haul flights generates terabytes or petabytes of data, and it is very costly to send this data to space. So many a times the airlines are not sending all the data to the space, and because of that there is a potential of risk. And also this also raises a problem of hackers, because you are streaming the data directly to the ground. There is a very easy chance that anybody can hack the data, and it can create a lot of other safety issues. In fact, in this paper, they mentioned that it just takes $1,000 of device to hack this data which is coming out from this airline to the space. So the IEEE, what they did was they did a study, and they came up with this new model called Amelia. And what it means is that here, what they're doing is instead of sending the bulk data as it is to the ground and then doing the analytics, they're actually doing the analytics right in the edge, right in the airplane itself. So what they did was, all the data which is being generated in the airline, they put the machine learning model in the flight itself, and it has these 3 phases, as you can see in this diagram: the parametric analysis, the ranking, and heuristic analysis. With all this data, they can do this analytics right in the plane itself to figure out if there is any anomaly, and if it is, then they send the data back to the ground, and so that you can take action with it. So this was the use case which I've seen is very common in aviation safety. And also looked at NASA's website. I think there's also a similar program called Safety Reporting System, which is also in a very similar line, right? Now I would like to double click on this use case and talk to you about what are the technologies which actually goes behind this whole use case. So if I go back to my use case, I think the main, if I look at the different technology which can go into this use case, is the first one is IoT. IoT means how you are ability to take the data right from the Internet of Devices and then do the standardization right in the IoT device itself. And then all kind of ML algorithm. Can you do decision making right on the edge so that you don't transfer bulk of the data on the ground, but you do the analysis right on the edge itself? There is also a lot of work. There's also in this, we are also doing a lot of machine learning modeling, which means that you need to create the machine learning model which can take this kind of sophisticated data and give you some kind of recommendation or prediction whether the data, based on this data, whether there is a chance of safety hazards or not, right? So you need to have technologies which can create the machine learning model. You need to have a feedback loop. Feedback loop means that once you have created your model, how will you make sure that this machine learning model is actually behaving right, which means that it is actually giving you the right kind of prediction. So you need to have this feedback loop so that you should know that the model which you have created is actually right. And then once you have created your model, you know this model is right, you also want to ingest this data, or you want to stream this data back to the ground so that they can take necessary action on top of it, right? So this is where data ingestion is important. You need to have data quality, which means you need to have cleansed data. And then you need to also have this kind of ML integration and a kind of a dashboard and reporting so that you will know whether this machine learning model is actually giving you the right recommendation or not. So we at Informatica actually deals with all these technology which you have seen here. I mean, if you have to implement this by yourself, or I mean, if you have any use case similar to this, we at Informatica actually deals with all of this similar kind of use case. So we call it this kind of iterative model. So, and we at Informatica have solved very similar use cases, not just in aviation, but also in in different verticals also, whether it's financial sector or it's in telecom or in all of these sectors, we have solved a very similar use case. So we categorize this use case into this 6 bucket, where we say the very first thing is important for your machine learning model is to figure out what is the right data set you need to do before you actually start doing the machine learning model. So you need to have technology which helps you to discover the right data set before you even start doing machine learning model. Then you need to have technology to take and ingest the data which you have discovered in a real time to the ground or to the edge itself, right? So this is where the ingestion of all speed is important. Then preparing the data, which means that one data is coming from the flight, but there must be some other data which is coming from historical side. How can you combine this data and then come up with a meaningful information out of it, right? So that is what we call it prepare step or data acquisition step. And then the next phase is where the machine learning is happening, where you can take all of this clean data and you can do machine learning with it. And then you can deploy this data, which means that this deploying this machine learning model right in the edge. So like in my previous aviation safety use case, we have taken this machine learning model, which we have already trained and developed, and we have deployed this right on the edge where they can do this kind of analytics. And then you can consume, which means that you need to also figure out the health of this machine learning model, which means that whether the model is working right or not, right? So this whole thing is something we can implement at Informatica. So if I talk about our products, I mean, I'll just give you a quick snippet of how we have implemented this similar use case using our technology. So we have we have a product which can actually be installed on the edge and which can do this kind of streaming analytics right on the edge. And edge here is a flight. But it can be anything. It can be a small device. It can be in your phone. It can be anything, right? Then we also have a product which can stream the data in all speed. We can do integration, which means we can take the data of every format and we can integrate the data. And then we can also prepare the data so that your data scientist can take the prepared data and they can do analytics. So this is how, these are the different products we at Informatica use to solve this kind of a use case. And if you look at this, the other picture of this end-to-end AI analytics, so this is the different things we do at Informatica, where we take the data, we can ingest the data in all kind of a format, we can enrich the data, we can prepare the data, we can also help you to catalog the data, which means that if you have, like, say, a humongous amount of data, how will you know, how will you discover the right data set for your preparation? So we at Informatica can help you to do all of this kind of analytics. So we can do everything around data. And why Informatica? I mean, we have been, if you guys don't know, I've not heard about this company. So this company was started in 1993, and we do all things data, whether it's AI/ML, or it's streaming, or it's batch, or it's big data. We have a presence in all over the world. We have a proven record of 25 customers. We have over 10,000 customers who are using our product to solve very similar use cases. Many airlines are using our product. So this is what Informatica can bring in to solve this aeronautic use case. So if this is sound interesting to you, and if you guys have any similar use case about data or about data management, you can definitely read more about us. I mean, we have our website here, and then we also have our product trials, which is available. So you can you can read about our product, our trials, and also about our AI and ML engine, which is Claire. We call it Claire, which is embedded in all our product, which helps you to do this kind of AI ML technology. So with that, I would I think like to thank you all for listening to me, and hope it gives you some kind of a perspective of what we do as a company, and how data and data management can help all in the aeronautic space. Thank you so much.
We have a few minutes for some question and answers. So, yes, Gary. Oh, let's try this.
Hi. I just had a question. I know before we can use any cloud services in the government, we have to go through FedRAMP certified things. I was wondering if the airlines that you're working with had any similar certification standards that they work to access services like you guys provide?
Yes, so it's a very good question. I think all of our customers, whether it's airline or even many of our software are used in our government agencies also, and all of them ask us a similar question. So we do have all the certification in place, whether it's HIPAA, SOC 2, and different, whatever is security certification is also available. We also have an on-premise version of our product, which means that if you don't want to use a cloud version for any reason, and if you want to leverage the on-prem version, or which means you want to take a download of that and put it in your own data center, we can do that. So yes, both of them is possible.
Right here.
Sure.
Across all the markets that you are engaged in, do you see the bigger bottleneck being in the data acquisition or the compute?
I think that there are a couple of things I see, right? One I see is people are able to get the data. Getting the data is not hard. But where I see the struggle is happening is how to actually figure out the meaning out of that data, how to get the meaningful insight out of that data. This is where I see the multiple organizations are struggling. So if you look at the multiple industries across, they say they now have this some new title called data scientist, which is a very highly, very important, very popular title nowadays in a technology. And what they do is that they just take data and they try to figure out the insight of this data using this AI ML models. And they spend 80% of their time in just figuring out, massaging the data, putting it into a right order so that they can do analytics. So in my view, there are two main problems in this in the industry. One is, first is once they acquire the data, they should figure out how to discover the right data for their analysis. So which means that if I have, like, say, hundreds and thousands of data, how will I know that if I have to build this aviation safety machine learning model, how will I know that out of these hundreds of thousands of my data, which out of these data will be meaningful for me? So that is very, very challenging. And the second thing is that once I get the data, how will I massage it to make meaning out of it, right? So these are the two key challenges I see.
Any other questions? Marty?
So I'm curious about the number of customers you have where have the access to information. So we've done some experiments where we're trying to use machine learning and AI. And a lot of the problem is getting access to the information because it's either held by, it's controlled by someone else.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly we're using scientific data, scientific publications and so forth, right? So, a variety of publishers actually control the rights. So we may have a license to use individual articles, but we can't ingest a whole database of articles in order to apply these things. Is that do you see a solution to how this will be resolved for the communication and sharing? Sounded like right now it's just, it's cost prohibitive to even try to do the types of things that we're talking about because we don't have the funds in order to get access to the data rights.
That's right. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right that machine learning model is as good as data. If you don't have the right data set, if you don't have enough data, your machine learning model is not good. And we see this is it's a very common challenge which we see across the industry where they say, I don't have access to the data, or even if I know the data, I don't have rights to use the data. So there are multiple, I've seen some organizations, there are two ways they solve it, right? One is they try to buy the data from the external agency, and if they get the budget, they buy that. The other option is that, okay, you take and you anonymize the data, right? So we have our products which can actually take your data and we can actually do masking, which means that I will not be able to, if there is any PII information or if there is any sensitive information, and if you want to say, and if your business is not ready to share it, you can always say that, okay, I can actually anonymize it, or I can make it even mask it so that I'm not using it for, they feel more comfortable sharing it, right? So, these are the two ways I see people try to get around it, but yeah, data is a challenge to get access of the right data.
Thank you. Any other questions? I don't see any other questions. Thank you for coming and sharing.
Thank you so much.